Everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the weekly watch list video brought to you by DeepView. That's the application that you see right here. If you want to check it out, go ahead and click the link popping up right now, as well as located down below in the description. Today, we're going to go through kind of 20 or so names that are in kind of my wider watch list for next week. And just to let you know, every day I'm not just watching 20 stocks. I'm basically picking 3 or 5 of these that are the most actionable for that day, and I picked that during the pre-market hours, and then those are kind of my focus for that day. That allows you to execute. If you're focusing on 20, 30, 40 names, it's very hard to execute properly because your attention's split up in 50 different ways. So it's definitely better to focus on a few and execute really well than try to just have your attention spread very very wide and really, in essence, very thinly. So with that, let's go ahead and run through these names, starting with AI here. So this had a kind of successful, undercut and rally setup. It pulled back to the 200-day moving average, had a failed breakdown, and then had a very strong day here on a pickup in volume, and then, resumed that move higher before pulling back late last week. What I'm watching now is basically for a range to form, and then look for a buyable, breakout from that range if it does decide to tighten. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I'd love to see volume continue to kind of die down if it does start to go sideways and tighten up. But this is definitely a theme. You've got the earnings and sales to support that theme, and we'll just have to wait and see whether it presents a nice setup and pulls back a little bit, let that moving average kind of catch up to price. So that is AI. Moving on, we've got AMD. Short-term extended at this point, so I'm watching for a pullback to the top of this base pivot. You had an entry potential right here, as well as lower down here within the base after it retook the moving averages. But now, for me, it's a little bit too stretched for an entry, even though this is an inside day. Maybe a small add if you've already got a core position from lower. But for me, I need to wait for a better risk-reward opportunity for AMD. But semiconductors in general are definitely basically a group to watch. And we saw a lot of strong moves recently, especially last week, and they'll definitely be a name that's top of my radar going forward. So that is AMD. Moving on, we've got Duolingo, also maybe a touch extended, though it just kind of broke out from this consolidation, and a nice action on this last day, so it could kind of reconfirm higher. That's what I'm watching for. Or I'd love, a low volume pullback back into this area, an inside day, an up setup, let that 21 EMA kind of catch up to price. That would provide, a really good opportunity here. And I think this definitely has some really nice fundamentals down here. As you can see, earnings and sales, as well as a very cool story. I've actually started using Duolingo, work on some Spanish a little bit, as I'm sure a lot of people have. And yeah, definitely an interesting name and a stock to watch in an interesting spot within its life cycle, moving up the right-hand side of the institutional due diligence phase. DT, really nice action, short-term extended. You could have bought it through this pivot here. Nice inside day. I'm watching for maybe a little bit more consolidation, 1 or 2 more days here, and then a push higher reconfirmation. But really nice overall pattern. I love these outside days. You can see this is also an opportunity, lower down within the base, and we're potentially restarting a stage 2 uptrend at this point. We're at kind of a key resistance level around 50. PACB, Pacific Biosciences. This is a biotech. You can see revenue is pretty decent, not yet profitable. It's right at the top of this prior base. So basically, I'm watching for a push higher on volume. Definitely want to see volume come in. You can see not any huge volume the past few days, but nice push off these lows. Pretty much going sideways here, and an inside day finish off last week. Moving on, we've got ARRY in the solar space here. Nice push off lows here. A lot of solar names, broke out or basically pushed higher very strongly and then pulled back late last week. This went a little bit quieter and tighter, although we do have a failed push higher here on Friday. Not on huge volume though. So I'm basically watching for a reset and a push through this level on large volume, ideally also breaking through 2384 and getting closer to the top of this prior base. But really nice, EPS and sales growth estimates here, as you can see down in the DeepView stats table. Moving on, we've got LMND, Lemonade. You can see this is the highest volume. It says, highest volume in 1 year, but I think actually in 2 years here, going well back a ways. You do have a lot of overhead supply, but this could be the start of a turn. and you can see nice action, then a little bit of a pullback, nice and orderly, and then another push higher, and then just going kind of sideways here. So I'm watching for a push through on volume through the kind of 16.4 pivot. A little bit of an outside day here on Friday, but maybe you get one more day of tightening before an attempted push through. That would be ideal. You do have, some trading up here as well as a 200-day looming above. So we'll have to see whether this can really get going, but I figured I'd throw it on the watch list. ON, speaking of on, you can see, broke out of this kind of early pivot, setting up a little bit of a consolidation pivot here. I love to see, drift lower sideways here over the next few days, and then a reconfirmation higher. This theme obviously has been working. Not the strongest fundamentals here. You can see deceleration is expected, and, not growth, actually slowing of growth. So we'll have to see what happens here. But overall, the chart is right near all-time highs and is acting pretty well. A little bit of a choppier mover, but we've also got the earnings with NVIDIA this week that could impact things. And I'll be watching those carefully as well. It's not on this list, but watching Snowflake as well. They're reporting earnings as well as we'll have to see how ON reacts to that. ALGM, potential, low cheat entry here. Once again, this theme has been working. This was a super strong stock, then it's kind of pulling back and formed a base, but looks like it has formed a at least short-term bottom and is back up against a declining 21 EMA. So we'll see if we can push through and make its way towards that 50 SMA and start on the right-hand side of this base. CELH basically consolidating after this earnings gap higher, watching for a pullback into the HVC on lower volume or a definitive breakout through this high on volume. You can see that it attempted to push through here, not on huge volume, and it faded into the end of the day. So we'll have to see whether it can finally stick things. And if it's going to push through in the short term, it's got to really go now. It's getting a little bit too tight up here, and you definitely want to manage your risk because this could break all the way down here and then kind of reset a longer consolidation if it doesn't go pretty soon. So we'll have to see what happens with CELH, but definitely really nice earnings and sales growth expected in this name, and really strong volume coming in on this earnings gap higher. PRTA, nice push higher, and then very orderly consolidation on declining volume, and an inside day to end out last week, watching for a push higher here on volume, pushing through and reconfirming higher and starting, restarting that trend. ELF also has earnings, as you can see from this indicator here, on May 24th at the market, after the market close. And you always want to double check these, even though we do provide pretty accurate estimates. You never know, and you want to make sure you double check with especially your holdings, but also stocks you're watching. You want to double check the actual website for these earnings dates, but definitely a very useful indicator to have. You can see AI is reporting a little bit ways away. That's why this is in gray versus this in red, which is a handy feature here, and that's on the 31st. But ELF reporting May 24th, and watching for a breakout of this base. You can see we've had nice gap ups the past two earnings, and we'll see if the trend can continue or if it's getting a little bit too stretched. Monday, nice push higher off these base lows. Very tight also the past few days as it tries to get going within a potential stage 2 uptrend. Really big volume coming in on this gap up, so we'll have to see whether this can finally push higher. Really nice revenue growth. Earnings, you can see it's still negative off and on, but the revenue growth is really, really strong, about 30% expected for the next 5 quarters. Moving on, we've got Shop, which has potentially started stage 2 uptrend. Nice breakout on large volume. Now another orderly pullback similar to PRTA, I believe, that we just took a look at, and basically watching for a reversal higher and a push off this potential higher low. CHDN, very similar, watching for a push higher off the 21 EMA area or a breakthrough this spot here on volume. LNTH, also very similar. You've got a downward trend line here as well, confluence of that, as well as the 21 EMA area pullback. And this has acted super strong since this gap up within the base, and really nice action on this day as well. And this high is also a pivot that I'd be watching carefully, as well as the kind of key 100 level. You can see this day, the high was 185, so it wasn't able to hold that 100 level, and we'll see if we can finally push through and do just that. SHLS, also a solar name that I'm watching, a little bit choppy in here, but nice action on this day, and it's right at this kind of key pivot area. I'd love it to tighten a little bit and then push higher on volume, and that could be potentially actionable as it moves through that pivot. RDFN also right near a base pivot, Really strong off lows, now consolidating, forming a little bit of a handle. This could use, 1 or 2 more days at least to form, one last contraction, tighten up here, and then I'm watching for breakthrough on volume. TGTX, really nice action. This trades really nicely. I like these type of moves, really strong and powerful. And now it's pulling back into that 21 EMA area and watching for a push higher through this DTL short-term flag. This bar right here does give me a little bit of pause because it tightened up and then broke down. So I definitely want to see it hold above the 21 EMA here, and maybe even have, a shakeout one day where it looks pretty awful. It's breaking below these lows and then recovers in the end of the day, recovering that 21 EMA. Sorry, I can't say that today, and then goes the next day. So yeah, watching for a couple of those different scenarios. And lastly, we've got FSLR, another solar name that, pushed higher and then pulled back. Pretty orderly fashion, right back to the moving averages, potential confluence here, and basically watching for a push higher on volume through these highs. MAXN is maybe one day ahead of this. You can see it pulled back to the moving averages and then had 1 day higher that was potentially actionable through this high. You can manage your risk really nicely versus that 50-day moving average, but we'll see what happens. I know there was a catalyst on this day, potential regulation, tax credit, something changed. So we'll have to see whether now that we've had a pullback after that event, whether the institutions step in and continue acquiring these names. But overall, let's X out MAXN. These are kind of my names that I'm watching pretty closely this week. And as I said, in the morning each day, I basically go through these names as well as, my wider list a little bit and pick out the top 3 most actionable 3 to 5 names. And that's kind of my focus during the open. Those are the only stocks I'm watching. I'm watching volume come in. I'm watching the price moves on the intraday charts and basically looking for a potential entry, looking at the intraday charts and considering the higher time frame levels. So that's pretty much it for this week's watch list. Let me know what you're watching down below. I'd love to hear a few names that aren't on this list and maybe a few of your favorites from this list if you are watching the same names. But with that, thanks so much for watching. If you did enjoy, go ahead and leave a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Take care.